He Fell in Love with His Wife by Edward Payson Rowe. Chapter 19. A Business Marriage. While Holcroft's sympathies had been deeply touched by the intense emotion of gratitude which had overpowered 𝙗𝚑, he had also been disturbed and rendered somewhat anxious. He was actually troubled lest the woman he was about to marry should speedily begin to love him and develop a tendency to manifest her affection in a manner that would seem to him extravagant and certainly disagreeable. Accustomed all his life to repress his feelings, he wondered at himself and could not understand how he had given way so unexpectedly. He was not sufficiently versed in human nature to know that the depth of 𝙗𝚑's distress was the adequate cause. If there had been a false or an affected word, he would have remained cool enough. In his inability to gauge his own nature as well as hers, he feared lest this business-like marriage was verging toward sentiment on her part. He did not like her kissing his hand. He was profoundly sorry for her, but so would he have been for any other woman suffering under the burden of a great wrong. He felt that it would be embarrassing if she entertained sentiments toward him which he could not reciprocate, and open manifestations of regard would remind him of the horror of his life, Mrs. Mumpson. He was not incapable of quick, strong sympathy in any instance of genuine trouble, but he was one of those men who would shrink in a natural recoil from any marked evidence of a woman's preference unless the counterpart of her regard existed in his own breast. To a woman of 𝙗𝚑's intuition, the way in which he withdrew his hand and the expression of his face had a world of meaning. She would not need a second hint. Yet she did not misjudge him. She knew that he meant what he had said, and had said all that he meant. She was also aware that he had not and never could understand the depths of fear and suffering from which his hand was lifting her. Her gratitude was akin to that of a lost soul saved, and that was all she had involuntarily expressed. She sat down again and quietly dried her eyes, while in her heart she purposed to show her gratitude by patient assiduity in learning to do what he required. Holcroft was now bent upon carrying out his plan as quickly as possible and returning home. He therefore asked, "Can you go with me at once, 𝙗𝚑?" She simply bowed her acquiescence. "That's sensible. Perhaps you had better get your things ready while I and Mr. Watterly go and arrange with Justice Harkins." 𝙗𝚑 averted her face with a sort of shame which a woman feels who admits such a truth. "I haven't anything, sir, but a hat and cloak to put on. I came away and left everything." "And I'm glad of it," said Holcroft heartily. "I wouldn't want you to bring anything which that scoundrel gave you." He paced the room thoughtfully a moment or two. Then he called Watterly in. "It's settled, Tom. 𝙗𝚑 will be Mrs. Holcroft as soon as we can see the justice. Do you think we could persuade him to come here?" "One thing at a time. Mrs. Holcroft, I may as well call you so, for when my friend says he'll do a thing, he does it. I congratulate you. I think you are out of your troubles. Since you are to marry my old friend, we must be friends too." And he shook her heartily by the hand. His words and manner were another ray of light, a welcome rift in the black pall that had gathered around her. "You were the first friend I found, sir, after what happened," she said gratefully. "Well, you found another and a better one, and he'll always be just the same. Any women might be glad. Come, Tom, no more of that. I'm a plain old farmer that does what he agrees, and that's all there is to it. I told 𝙗𝚑 just what I wished and could do." "I should hope so," interrupted Watterly, laughing. "You've taken enough time, certainly. I guess you've talked more than you have before in a year." "Yes, I know. I'm almost as bad as an oyster about talking, except when I'm with you. Somehow we've always had a good deal to say to each other. In this case I felt that it was due to 𝙗𝚑 that she should know all about me, and understand fully just how I felt concerning this marriage. The very fact that she hasn't friends to advise her made it all the more needful that I should be plain and not mislead her in any respect. She has just as good a right to judge and act for herself as any woman in the land, and she takes me and I take her with no sentimental lies to start with. Now let's get back to business. I rather think, since Harkins was an old acquaintance of mine, he'll come up here and marry us, don't you? Alida, wouldn't you rather be married here quietly than face a lot of strangers? You can have your own way. I don't care now if half the town was present. Oh, yes, indeed, sir. I don't wish to meet strangers, and I'm not very strong yet. I thank you for considering my feelings so kindly. Why, that's my duty, replied the farmer. Come, Watterly, the sun is getting low, and we've considerable to do yet before we start home. I'm with you. Now, Alida, you go back quietly and act as if nothing had happened till I send for you. Of course, this impatient young groom will hurry back with the justice as fast as possible. Still, we may not find him, or he may be so busy that we shall have to come back for you and take you to his office. Alida turned to leave the room. Holcroft gave her his hand and said kindly, Now don't you be nervous or worried. I see you are not strong, and you shall not be taxed any more than I can help. Goodbye for a little while. Meantime, Watterly stepped out a moment and gave his domestic a few orders. Then he accompanied Holcroft to the barn, and the horses were soon attached to the market wagon. You're in for it, Jim, sure enough, he said, laughing. What will Angie say to it all? Tell her that you've been a mighty good friend to me, yet I hope I may never return any favors of the same kind. By jocks, I hope not. I guess it's just as well she was away. She'll think we've acted like two harum-scarum men, and will be awfully scandalized over your marrying this woman. Don't you feel a little nervous about it? No. When my mind's made up, I don't worry. Nobody else need lie awake, for it's my affair. Well, Jim, you know how I feel about it. But I've got to say something, and I might as well say it plain. That's the only way you ought to say it. Well, you've talked long enough to give me plenty of time to think. One thing is clear, Angie won't take to this marriage. You know I'd like to have you both come in and take a meal, as you've always have done. But then a man must keep peace with his wife, and I understand, Tom. We won't come till Mrs. Watterly asks. But you won't have hard feelings? No, indeed. Ain't you doing your level best as a friend? Well, you know, women are so set about these things, and Angie is rather hard on people who don't come up to her mark of respectability. What's more, I suppose you'll find that the others will think and act as she does. If you cared about people's opinions, I should have been dead against it. But as you feel and are situated, I'm hanged if I don't think she's just the one. If it hadn't been this one, I don't believe it would have been anyone. Here we are. And he tied his horses before the office of the justice. Mr. Harkins greeted Holcroft with a sort of patronizing cordiality, and was good enough to remember that they had been at the little country schoolhouse together. In Watterly he hardly recognized a brother politician who controlled a goodly number of votes. When Holcroft briefly made known his errand, the justice gave a great guffaw of laughter and said, "Oh, bring her here, and I'll invite in some of the boys as witnesses." "I'm not afraid of all the witnesses that you could crowd into a 10-acre lot," said Holcroft somewhat sternly. "But there is no occasion for me to invite the boys, whoever they are, or anyone else. She doesn't want to be stared at. I was in hopes, Mr. Harkins, that you'd ride up to the almshouse with us and quietly marry us there." "Well, I guess you'd better bring her here. I'm pretty busy this afternoon, and—" "See here, Ben," said Watterly, taking the justice aside. "Holcroft is my friend, and you know I'm mighty thick with my friends. They count more to me than my wife's relations. Now I want you to do what Holcroft wishes as a personal favor to me, and the time will come when I can make it up to you." "Oh, certainly, Watterly, I didn't understand," replied Harkins, who looked upon Holcroft as a close and, as he would phrase it, a no-account farmer from whom he could never expect even a vote. "I'll go with you at once. It's but a short job." "Well," said Holcroft, "how short can you make it?" "Let me get my book." And he took from a shelf the justice's assistant. "You can't want anything shorter than this?" And he read, "By this account of joining hands, you do take each other as husband and wife, and solemnly engage in the presence of these witnesses to love and honor and comfort and cherish each other as long as you both shall live. Therefore, in accordance with the law of the state of New York, I do hereby pronounce you husband and wife." A sailor couldn't tie a knot quicker than that. I guess you can, Justice, said Holcroft, taking the book. Suppose you only read this much. By act of joining hands you do take each other as husband and wife, therefore in accordance with the law, etc. Would that be a legal marriage? Certainly. You'd have to go to a divorce court to get out of that. It's my purpose to keep out of courts of all kinds. I'll thank you to read just that much and no more. I don't want to say anything that isn't exactly true. You see how it is, Ben. Holcroft hasn't known the woman long, and she's a nice woman, too, if she's boarding at my hotel. Holcroft needs a wife, must have one, in fact, to help run his house and dairy. It wasn't exactly a love match, you know, and he is that kind of a man that a yoke of oxen couldn't draw a word out of him that he didn't mean. Yes, I see now, said Harkins. I'll read just what you say and no more. And I'll have a little spread that we can be longer at in the ceremony, added Watterly, who was inclined to be a little hilarious over the affair. Holcroft, however, maintained his grave manner, and when they reached the almshouse he took Watterly aside and said, See here, Tom, you've been a good friend today and seconded me in everything. Now let the affair pass off just as quietly and seriously as possible. She's too cast down for a gay wedding. Suppose we'd had a daughter who'd been through such an experience, a nice, good, modest girl. Her heart's too sore for fun and jokes. My marrying her is much the same as pulling her out of deep water in which she was sinking. You're right, Jim, I didn't think. And one doesn't have much cause to be so sparing of the feelings of such creatures as come here. But she's out of the common run, and I ought to have remembered it. By jocks, you're mighty careful about promising to love, cherish, and obey and all that. But I guess you'll do a sight more than many you do promise. Of course I'm going to be kind. That's my duty. Give Harkins a hint. Tell him that she's lost her mother. He didn't know when the old lady died, but it will kind of solemnize him. Watterly did as requested, and Harkins, now convinced that his political interests would be furthered by careful complaisance with all requirements, put on a grave, official air, and was ready for business. Alida was sent for. She was too agitated to say farewell to any of the poor creatures with whom she had been compelled to associate, even to the few who, though scarcely sane, had manifested tenderness and affection. She had felt that she must reserve all her strength for the coming ordeal, which she both welcomed and feared inexpressibly. She knew how critical was the step she was taking, and how much depended on it, yet the more she thought, the more it seemed to her as if Providence had, as if by a miracle, given her a refuge. Holcroft's business-like view of the marriage comforted her greatly, and she asked God to give her health and strength to work faithfully for him for many years. But she had sad misgivings as she followed the messenger, for she felt so weak that she could scarcely walk. It was indeed a pallid, sorrowful, trembling bride that entered Watterly's parlor. Holcroft met her, and taking her hand, said kindly, Courage, it'll be over in a minute. She was so pale and agitated that the justice asked, Do you enter into this marriage freely and without compulsion of any kind? Please let me sit down a moment, she faltered, and Watterly hastened to give her a chair. She fixed her eyes on Holcroft and said anxiously, You see, sir, how weak I am. I have been sick, and I fear I am far from being well now. I fear you will be disappointed. It is not right to you, and that I may not be able— Alida, interrupted Holcroft gravely, I'm not one to break my word. Home and quiet will soon restore you. Answer the justice and tell him the exact truth. No elixir could have brought hope and courage like that word home. She rose at once and said to Harkins, I have consented to Mr. Holcroft's wishes with feelings of the deepest gratitude. Very well. Join hands. She hesitated and looked for a moment at Holcroft with strange intensity. It's all right, Alida, he said with a smile. Come. His perfect honesty and steadfastness of purpose stood him in good stead then, for she at once came to his side and took his hand. Justice Harkins solemnly opened his big book and read, By this act of joining hands, you do take each other as husband and wife. Therefore, in accordance with the law of the state of New York, I do hereby pronounce you husband and wife. That's all." "I don't think you'll ever be sorry, Ellida," said Holcroft, pressing her hand as he led her to a chair. Watterly again bustled up with congratulations, and then said, "You must all come out now to a little supper, and also remember that it was gotten up in a hurry." The domestic stared at Ellida and Holcroft, and then, surmising what had taken place, was so excited that she could scarcely wait on the guests. Holcroft, with the simple tact which genuine kindness usually suggests, was attentive to his bride, but managed, by no slight effort for him, to engage the two men in general conversation, so that Ellida might have time to recover her composure. His quiet, matter-of-fact bearing was reassuring in itself. A cup of strong tea and a little old currant wine, which Watterly insisted on her taking, brightened her up not a little. Indeed, her weakness was now largely due to the want of nourishment suited to her feeble condition. Moreover, both nerves and mind found relief and rest in the consciousness that the decisive step had been taken. She was no longer shuddering and recoiling from a past in which each day had revealed more disheartening elements. Her face was now toward a future that promised a refuge, security, and even hope. The quiet meal was soon over. Holcroft put a $5 bill in the hands of the justice, who filled in a certificate and departed, feeling that the afternoon had not been spent in vain. "Jim," said Watterly, drawing his friend aside, "you'll want to make some purchases. You know she's only what she wears. Well, how's you off for money?" "Well, Tom, you know I didn't expect any of this kind when—" "Of course I know it. Will 50 answer?" "Yes, you're a good friend. I'll return it in a day or two." "Return it when you're a mind to. I say, Ellida, I want you to take this. Jim Holcroft can't get married and his bride not receive a present from me." And he put $10 in her hand. Tears rushed to her eyes as she turned them inquiringly to Holcroft to know what she should do. "Now see here, Tom, you've done too much for us already." "Shut up, Jim Holcroft. Don't you end the day by hurting my feelings. It's perfectly right and proper for me to do this. Goodbye, Ellida. I don't believe you'll ever be sorry you found your way to my hotel." Ellida took his proffered hand, but she could only falter, I can never forget."